As they practice this, there grows up in them a taste for simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
Because a distracted life, one that's full of extraneous or superfluous complication, isn't very conducive to maintaining mindfulness.
Yes.
So mindfulness practice actually feeds simplicity, and simpler living enables mindfulness practice because it presents fewer distractions and fewer distortions, and allows us to be more present to the practice and to the consciousness that develops from it.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Well, people may be, as we're listening, they may be thinking, how can we practice this? How can I integrate this into my life, perhaps the life of my family? Can you give people some direction here as to some simple things they may initiate right now?
To begin a practice of mindfulness or to begin a practice of simplicity?
Actually, probably both, because they're both related, as you had suggested.
Well,
even simplicity, even if we stick with that topic.
I'm going to begin with mindfulness.
Okay.
Mindfulness practice is itself quite simple. It involves beginning to set aside even 10 minutes, a day.
Mm-hmm.
10 minutes is really minimal, but in today's rushed, hyper-excited world, 10 minutes itself is important. To formally go apart where you can enjoy some solitude, turn off all the devices, the alarms, the incoming email bells, and so on. Find some silence, find some solitude, sit quietly, and simply concentrate on your breath and count those breaths. And it sounds silly, but we constantly return to the breath counting. And we're beginning little by little to train the brain and those neural pathways and ourselves to let go of distractions and to concentrate on one thing. And in my class with my students, I teach them a breath-focused meditation, and we do it for 10 minutes or so, and then I just ask them very gently to transfer their concentration from their breath to an orange that I've given them. And I guide them through a process of very slowly and patiently perceiving every aspect of the orange, its weight and color and temperature and scent and so on. And little by little we open the orange and smell it and taste it and look at it and contemplate where it came from and how it came to us and what it represents in nature and what it will do for our bodies and so on. So beginning with this formal sitting practice of just paying attention to one's breath and counting the breaths, which is called in the Buddhist tradition Vipassana, we learn to transfer this out of that practice to other moments during the day. And little by little, we discover that this is sweet and it's rewarding. And people then feel quite naturally inclined to give the mindfulness practice more time. So at one level, for every hour we're spending in mindfulness practice, we're avoiding other mischief.
Yes. And
which the planet and other human beings will probably thank us for.
Really appreciate, yes.
At least you're not doing anything worse. And just as an aside or as a tangent, I've had students who are particularly scrupulous in their religion say, "Well, isn't this a waste of time? Just sitting here and thinking about my breath. Isn't that quite self-centered and selfish? Shouldn't I be out there suffering for the good of mankind?" And I say, well, that's true if you believe that you're a separate individual. But since we're all connected, you may or may not perceive that directly at the moment.
Yes.
But you keep doing this and you will, right? And so we are connected. And not just connected, we're constantly in this vibrant web of relationships that we can't get out of. So the question is, how do we be in that web? Like, how are we in that web? And if we're more mindful of it and more awake to it and more responsive to it, we're generally living with more integrity and less violence, and at a higher energy pitch than we would if we're just mucking along as solitary, lonely, suffering individuals. So, for me, in that practice, is really the root of how to live simply. I mean, if we slow down, if we pay attention, we begin immediately to notice what is abrasive, what is destructive, what is violent in my world, and I need to just turn that off, whether it's a television or something I own or something that I need to get rid of. And it also sensitizes us to what brings well-being. Mm. So we put in more well-being and we take out more ill-being.
Yes, yes.
And little by little, life changes.
Well, Mark, well-being really ties into voluntary simplicity, because one of the concepts that I talk about when addressing nutrition is that sometimes enough is not enough. In other words, people continue to consume food in ways in which create disease because the body is saying, I've had enough. And yet we continually consume more and more. And that idea of consuming food is often related to the fact that we don't feel contentment and peace inside. So this connects. Well-being and voluntary simplicity do go hand in hand. What about the environmental repercussions? I think most people can extrapolate that into our discussion, but what are the repercussions to following this consumer model that the world has enjoyed and continues to build upon? How do you think this impacts us personally?
Yeah. First of all, I wouldn't dispute generally that consumerism isn't fun. You know, I mean, it's
yeah,
a lot of pleasures and a lot of fun distractions.
Mm-hmm.
But the question, I think, that is pressing in on us all now is whether the environmental and social costs of these fun things we do can be justified at any level, because there are consequences that simply follow from the laws of physics and chemistry that we're now seeing and will suffer more as time goes along. Consumerism, consumer culture, is a disaster for the environment, and it's a catastrophe for other species. And since we are connected through the bodies of those other species, it's a disaster for us.
Yes.
Even though it's been fun and offers many pleasures. So it's sort of the pleasure of the addict. Yes, there is a high, and it was fun when we were young to experiment with it, but we learn later that there's a hidden disease in it which can destroy everything we treasure. And so consumer culture is, I mean, we see it, it's changing the climate, it's extinguishing species, it's the next great extinction event on Earth, the sixth great extinction, they say, all being driven by us, and primarily being driven by greed and fear, which are the two primary motivators for capitalist market cultures. Mm-hmm. So we have this going on, and one of the things that initially drew me to simple living was I was just appalled by war, by environmental degradation, by the loss of species, by the death-dealing competition that occurs between individuals. All of this pathology that we seem to muddle about in. And I really wanted, for a long time I was quite perplexed about, well, where should I put my energy if I want to try to make things better? And after thinking about it for a long time and working on a number of different causes, environmental and peace and disarmament and other things, I mean, I came back to the idea of simple living, that all of these, or many of these afflictions that we live with are branches on the same tree, and the root of that tree is this delusional attraction we have for overconsumption. On the environmental side, the logic of voluntary simplicity is very simple. The less we consume, the less we extract from nature, the less waste we leave, the less pollution we create, the less energy we need. And all of that leaves the living world less disturbed, less in need of healing, and more vibrantly alive. So living simply, to me, is the sort of crown royal pathway to environmentally responsible living. It's really what we all need to do if we care about the future of the planet and what our children will inherit.
Yes. I remember hearing, I believe it was on television, that there was a statement made by an environmentalist who said that the Aboriginal people lived in Australia for 40,000 years and never left their mark.
Yeah.
And that struck me. I know that, again, we live in a modern world, but if something happened to our society, what kind of a mark would we leave? And it would be an ugly, an ugly scar on our planet. And so mindfulness, as you suggest, Mark, this is a way of thinking. It's a way of being. It's not an intellectual discussion. It's a way of contributing back to society in ways that are healthier. And we can do this. I'm sure you would agree with this, that we can do this without disrupting our lives entirely. Is that true? I mean, we don't. Yeah. Could you give us a couple ideas on how that would happen?
Well, the idea that living more simply somehow involves some sort of radical one-time conversion, that turns everything upside down is a little extreme, and it's also, I think, a way of avoiding doing anything. If I can scare myself with the idea that this is going to be traumatic, then I really don't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah, people do that with wellness too.
How do we get started?
How do we chunk it down? Yeah.
20 years ago, I would say little by little, that the path to simple living is a lifelong practice, and if we think about it like learning the piano or learning to dance, it's something that we can take up right away in an elementary way, and we can get a tune out of the piano. But it's going to take us a while before we can play Rachmaninoff, right? So
yes.
And it's even when we continue to practice every day. So, I'm going back again to mindfulness, that little by little, if we practice the mindfulness, then the material side of things will become clear. Richard Gregg's definition of purpose, asking myself consciously during my mindfulness practice, why am I here? What song am I supposed to sing? And not necessarily that I'm looking for a voice from heaven, but what I am looking for is this intuitive sense of a fit between what brings me joy and wellness and also brings the world joy and wellness. When those two things coincide, that's probably where I should be living, right? And
beautifully said.
So as that purpose becomes clearer, the material things in life that serve it and those that detract from it sort of sort themselves into two piles. And